everyone. Welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet,
Ad Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack, your resident space policy advocate.
And I'm Newton. I'm your guy for space technology.
All right. So, Newton, do you want to run us through, give us a little run of show, if you will?
Sure. So here's what's going on with the show on this amazing snow day that we're having here in DC. In our latest from Washington, we're going to be talking a little bit of news about what's happening with Bridenstine and him going into or at least being confirmed or being put up for approval for NASA administrator. We'll talk about Hyten, who is not ready to endorse the Space Force, apparently. And then we'll talk a little bit about Trump and how serious he is about creating a Space Force. In our Space News Highlight of the Week, we're going to be talking a little bit about cryptocurrency and what that has to do with the future of NASA's Deep Space Network.
We're going to be that podcast. Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. All right, all search engines come to me. In international news, we'll talk a little bit about Japanese government investing in their space industry. And in latest in tech, we'll talk about Google AI, once again, hunting for planets and how that capability will be available to you, the public. And then in Coming Soon to Space, well, you'll see in Coming Soon to Space. Jack, take it away. All right. So it is sort of a non-consequential week here in Washington. A lot of stuff that's going on that really none of it means anything until it means something.
That sounds like Washington.
It does sound like Washington, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so the first thing on our docket is a letter to the majority and minority leaders of the Senate from a group of 61 bipartisan members of the House, encouraging the Senate to vote on Bridenstine and confirm him as NASA administrator. So for those of you who have maybe lived under a rock and haven't listened to the last couple episodes, there's been a lot going on. Well, really not a lot going on when it comes to Bridenstine as the nominee for the Trump administration to be their NASA administrator.
In fairness, there has been a lot going on in terms of the administrator position.
Yes.
Given that NASA's now been through two acting administrators at this point. Or it's on its second acting administrator without a permanent administrator, which doesn't bode well for the organization. Yeah.
So even though Robert Lightfoot has said that his departure will not incur any problems for any long-term or major decisions that the space program has to make, but we all know that it will. So this letter signed by 61 members is signed by both Democrats and Republicans, including Ed Perlmutter, the Democrat from Colorado who always holds up the Mars 2033 bumper sticker, Brian Babin, who's the chairman of the subcommittee on space on the House, Derek Kilmer, who's a Democrat from Washington State, Frank Lucas, who is supposedly going to be the next leader of the subcommittee on space or chairman of the science committee since Lamar Smith is leaving. So there's a lot of big names on this list, including many Democrats. Now, this is something that we talked about last week as maybe it's sort of materializing what we talked about last week, in that with Lightfoot deciding to retire, it's almost pushing the Senate to make that vote, to just up or down, yay or nay, is Bridenstine going to be the next administrator? Because without an administrator, and they even mentioned this in this letter, that without an administrator, NASA is not as valuable to our nation and not as valuable to the entire world. It'd be a travesty to America's space program for it to remain leaderless at this critical time when America's space industry is making rapid advances that will set the course of space leadership for decades to come, reads one of the lines in this letter. This means absolutely nothing in the legislative world. The House does not confirm presidential appointees. The Senate does that, which is, I guess, why we're seeing this. This letter shows that there is support within the House for Bridenstine, but unless that support actually exists within the Senate, within the 50-ish members of the Senate who are apprehensive about Bridenstine, whether it's because of internal party politics, as we saw with Rubio or McCain, or because of issues of climate change and LGBT inclusivity that the Democratic caucus has brought up in a number of settings. So ultimately, it's just a letter that came out all of 2 days ago, I think. Yeah, March 19th is when it was released. This isn't something that is going to itself make any change in this process. It's the actual process of confirming the administrator of NASA is the Senate calls a vote and it happens, or it doesn't, depending on how the Senate votes. But this letter is encouraging them to even just have that vote. However, with everything else going on this week, from the federal government shutting down for snow to maybe the federal government shutting down on Friday if they don't pass this omnibus budget bill, the Senate's probably going to be a little preoccupied for a while. So even if this has the effect of pushing Senate leadership to call a vote on Bridenstine, it's probably not going to happen for another week or two. So we'll keep you apprised to what's going on, and we'll let you know if and when we have a vote scheduled for the administrator position of NASA.
But I guess it's just a good way of the House making its stance known, right? As far as what it thinks of Bridenstine, and it being willing to maybe not necessarily approve Bridenstine, but it's saying we should get on with this vote.
Yeah, and it talks about his service to the country. It talks about how enthusiastic he is in supporting space exploration and commercial space development. And it's just showing, there's a lot of goodwill within the House towards Bridenstine, who is a colleague of theirs, note, but that also within the space community, there's this pretty strong support for Bridenstine as administrator, because he's one of us, right? He's other politics aside, he's enthusiastic about space and expanding the role that NASA plays in our national conversation. So, yeah, ultimately, like I was saying, this doesn't mean anything until it means something. So we'll keep you apprised of anything that changes here. And Newton, anything else on this?
No, I got nothing. It's not it's not actively doing anything. It's just the House making itself, saying that we're taking a stance on this, and our stance is you should put this up to a vote. That's really
it's 61 members of the House, which isn't a majority,
right? Yeah,
so it's a little different than a sense of the House,
but the House caucus that actually deals with matters in space is saying this, right? Those are that's the big chunk of those 61 members.
Yes, a lot of them are members of the science committee and of the space subcommittee. So yeah, and that's something we'll get into later, what the difference is between a letter like this and what a sense of Congress is, or a sense of the House. So that'll be something that we talk about later. Anyway, so the Space Force is taking Capitol Hill by storm, says Space News. So, as we reported on last week in a speech to the 3rd Air Wing of the Marine Corps 2 weeks ago, President Trump made a couple statements that were a little different, not congruent with previous policy that his administration has held up. So, the Space Force is this idea that there needs to be a branch of the military dedicated exclusively to operations, warfighting, and control of the space domain. Same way that the Air Force deals with the air domain, the Navy, the sea domain, and the Army, the land domain. So his administration previously was opposed to the development of a Space Corps in the National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed just in the last couple months. His administration came out and rallied against the Space Corps idea, which was championed by Mike Rogers of Alabama. And it dissipated after that, and then got brought back to life. It's one of those niche policy things that this one member or these couple members really want to happen, and they could very well be onto something, but they just don't have the overall support within the Congress to get it done, and even within members of the administration. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was that General John Hyten, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. STRATCOM, as we were talking about last week, the closest thing we have to a space wing division part of DoD, U.S. Stratcom, declined to endorse the president's call for creation of a space force at a Senate hearing. So this was on the record. This was testimony. The meeting for the Senate Armed Services Committee, they asked him, would you endorse this move forward with the creation of a space force? And Bill Nelson, the senator from Florida, asked Hyten for his views on creating a space force, or as Nelson phrased it, quote, ripping space out of the Air Force, a prospect, quote, he is not too keen on. So there's a lot of people within the Congress who are not in favor of this. There's a very small number who are, and there's a lot of people sort of in the middle, not really caring one way or another, because it's not something that, as we've talked about, is urgently needed within Department of Defense, and is something that maybe we have a lot bigger things to be worrying about, especially within the DoD as they're going through their first ever audit, that maybe creating a whole new portion of DoD to focus on space isn't the right call for right now.
It might make things a little difficult.
Maybe just complicate matters just a little bit. But so Hyten is not ready to endorse the Space Force, and also some members of the Air Force have come out in recent interviews saying that they are not a huge fan of this call. Even the Secretary of the Air Force came out and she said that she's not in favor of the Space Force. Now, on the flip side of that, one of the other folks at DoD, Kenneth Rapuano, he's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security, told lawmakers at a meeting that the president was 100% serious that we should create a space force within the U.S. military. And so we're getting these conflicting statements from members of the administration. The Department of Defense is a portion of the executive branch, and by extension, a portion of the administration. So it's interesting to see that there's this internal squabbling between different portions of the Trump presidency when it comes to this particular issue, with the person up at top who makes all of those ultimate decisions is in favor of it. So I would say that Hyten and his cadre of people who are not in favor of the Space Force should probably try to convince him first, and not try to convince other people, because ultimately this is a decision policy-wise that the president can try to champion in this next iteration of the National Defense Authorization Act, if that's what it comes to, or in the creation of new policy or legislation. So a lot going on there, but still we're at this standstill. So again, this non-consequential week that in the long run, this could very well be seen as a turning point in national policy setting for the U.S. government's involvement in the space domain. So, Newton, I know we've talked extensively about this, but anything about any of this newfangled squabbling?
I mean, and well, that's the thing. I hate to report on squabbling because everything is just kind of speculative, and there's really not much to say there. This is kind of a wait and see week. I have a feeling next week will be a wait and see week, because most of the rest of this week, as you said, is going to be spent on trying to get us some form of a budget so that we can keep the lights on, keep the government running. And then next week is going to be more internal squabbles until we come to a solution. So any solutions to either of the things that we discussed probably won't be discussed until the back half of next week at the earliest. I mean, at the very earliest.
As we talked about the other day, this could very well have been something that the president saw Space Force, got really excited about it, said it in a speech, and then never talks about for the next 6 months.
Oh boy, that's never happened.
Right? I mean, this space could very well be thrown on the back burner because of this budget deal that they're trying to put together, because of any number of policy things that are happening on the Hill, or non-policy things. If something comes out about whatever, like it could derail this entire conversation about the Space Force, and this episode will be for naught.
Yeah.
So
So
nothing matters until it matters.
nothing matters until it matters, and that's actually the perfect segue into our discussion on NASA and blockchain. I almost said Bitcoin right away because that's the thing that it's associated with.
We should count how many times we say Bitcoin in this episode. That's totally not about Bitcoin.
That's very true. This is not about Bitcoin, and for those of you who aren't familiar with blockchain or Bitcoin, we'll get you familiar over the course of this episode. But basically, cryptocurrency, and this is funny, as explained by John Oliver on Last Week Tonight, is think about it as this: everything you don't know about money combined with everything you don't know about computers. That's what cryptocurrency is. So what does this have to do with NASA? Well, on a recent episode of NPR's Explore Radio, which is a local program out in sort of the Midwest, there was a discussion about NASA teaming up with the University of Akron's Jinwei Coxis, who's an expert in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and building smart networks. She received a $330,000 NASA grant recently to design a resilient network and computing paradigm using blockchain. She says that the rigors of deep space require computer systems to have incredibly tough hardware and software, which is able to operate both under low power and make decisions based on limited data and possible delays in transmission. And that's where the blockchain infrastructure really starts to kick in, at least based on her justification, is because we have to have a secure and effective structure to support this kind of high-level and decentralized machine learning. So let's first kind of dive into what is blockchain, because this is a word that has been tossed around. As you said before, we've heard about it in terms of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in general. But in reality, I mean, you're describing a distributed security algorithm. A blockchain is basically a secure, distributed, immutable database that's shared by all parties in a distributed network, where transaction data can be recorded either on-chain for basic information or off-chain in case of extra attachments, and easily audited. To break that down a little further, using the Bank of England's words, the blockchain is a technology that allows people who don't know each other to trust a shared record of events. In fact, the common example of a blockchain that comes from the world of cryptocurrency talks about having a distributed ledger, where everything in the distributed network agrees on transactions that occur within that network. So if you, Jack, are an entity who is going to deposit an additional $100 into your bank account, you have a number that everyone agrees on with that you have in your bank account, and now everyone sees sort of an update. It's a little bit more mathematically complex than that, but that in effect is the idea. Everyone agrees on that update to your account. Everyone agrees on how much you have, and so you can justify that you have X amount of dollars, not based on only one service in the network, but by everyone in the network agreeing that you have that much money. And the network typically validates these kinds of transactions through different mechanisms, but mainly through either a proof of work or a proof of stake, which we can dive deeply into those concepts another time. But basically, a proof of work asks the participants, who are typically called miners, to solve complex mathematical problems in order to add a block, which in turn requires a ton of energy and hardware capacity to be decoded. And a proof of stake instead tries to solve the energy efficiency issue, attributing roughly more mining power to participants who own more coins. But the data for this kind of network are stored in rigid structures called blocks, which are connected to each other in a chain through a hash, which is a block of data that was created by solving some complex mathematical problem. The blocks have a header, which includes metadata, and content, which includes the real transactional data, so how much you increase by, how much you decrease by, real raw numbers. Since every block is connected to the previous one, as the number of participants and blocks grow, it is extremely hard to modify any information without having the full consensus of the network. And what's interesting about this, I know a lot of people tend to write this off as just hype, but people are actually taking this seriously now. This originally was thought of. This notion of blockchain was thought of as just a disruptive innovation at its beginning. and that's just a term of art coined by Clayton Christensen, which is it just means that it's an innovation that creates a new market by providing a different set of values, which ultimately overtakes existing markets. You've probably heard that before in the policy realm as well. But every business person and tech guru is saying that this is actually beyond that, and they're calling it a foundational technology that aims to change the scope of intermediation. And that's because of the ability for distributed ledger technologies to reduce both the cost of verification and networking, influencing then the market structure and eventually allowing the creation of entirely new marketplaces. So not just replacing one market, replacing multiple markets. And it seems that this is going to build a market within the space industry as well. So when I saw this, my first question was, how is this really going to be helpful to NASA? How is this really helpful in a deep space network where trust isn't always necessarily an issue? So I dove a little deeper into it, and in reality, one of the bigger things that using this blockchain paradigm actually helps out with is artificial intelligence. So it helps AI in a few different ways. So the first is helping AI to explain itself. Basically, the AI black box structure, and this is something that we talked about in a previous episode on neural networks in Google, it suffers from an explainability problem. There's no clear audit trail as far as why an AI algorithm will come to the decision that it came to. The blockchain and this distributed ledger process allows humans to be able to actually read and interpret through its audit trail, through this network of people agreeing why a decision was made by a swarm of artificial intelligence agents, which could be helpful, let's say, on a deep space light sail mission where some sort of fault occurred. And we need to go back and understand why the network came to the decision that it came to, and we in order to do some deep investigations of it. Another way that this is helpful is actually increasing AI effectiveness. A secure data sharing network means that more data and better models, better actions, better results, and better new data can be placed into that model, given that it's completely distributed. Once again, this is better. This is going to be better, in the far-flung future for a more liberal construction of an intelligence-based network where you have multiple participants from different countries who all want to participate in a piece of space infrastructure. But we would want to have some notion of trust throughout that network. The blockchain would help with this, and it also helps in areas of obviously increasing artificial trust in that space, and even reducing catastrophic risk scenarios. An AI coded in a decentralized autonomous organization with specific smart contracts would be able to only perform a specific set of actions and nothing more, and that's extremely important for spacecraft that has no manual kill switch. So blockchain will link the deep space network and sort of give us a paradigm for going forward. NASA's Tom Kepora was quoted, as saying that he's also looking at using the next generation of computer chips called neuromorphic processors that use less power by mimicking the brain's wiring to execute this same paradigm. So, but don't ask me if this is going to, give AI some sort of a conscience in space, because it won't.
This is Skynet. You said this is Skynet. You said Skynet and Bitcoin.
This is this has a strong potential for Skynet, but it's
Skynet and Bitcoin.
Skynet and Bitcoin. But yeah, so this is a paradigm that's getting picked up. And like I said, it has a significant case in AI. We're used to it just having sort of this cryptocurrency use case, but it's being used more and more in just artificial intelligence research in general in order to create massively distributed networks to do processing and to discover certain specific physical phenomena, things like that. So we're going to see more and more. We're going to see this term blockchain used more and more, and it's going to be used more outside of the sort of the space of cryptocurrency for NASA research and research beyond that as well.
So an unintended consequence of a revolutionary technology.
Yeah. I mean, it was foundational, so they knew it had many use cases when it started, but this is,
It was primarily used for
for
what's it called?
I think it's called Dogecoin. It's also used for
Dogecoin.
Dogecoin.
Got it.
Bitcoin.
Which I wonder what the value of Dogecoin is right now.
Who knows?
But I'm not. Well, so I actually did just do the math. I pulled up Coinbase and NASA's proposed budget is equivalent to 2,228,830 Bitcoin.
Oh my god.
Oh, Bitcoin just went down again. So it's
I was
actually
gonna
more.
say it's going down by the second.
I'm sorry, New Horizons. We're gonna have to shut you down. We lost some money on Bitcoin. It was a major mistake on the part.
I think it's only
of NASA.
Only about. I think it's less than 10% of investors actually have investment in any form of cryptocurrency at this point. It's really not as popular as most people give it credit for.
Well, I wonder what makes up that 10%. Are those new to the investing world? Because I will admit that I don't have any investments other than Bitcoin. It was my first investment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean that, like, for a lot of people, I think it was their first thing because it's so easily understood.
That's interesting.
Not to become a Bitcoin episode or a Bitcoin podcast, which I think we're at like 15 mentions of the coin.
Yeah.
But it is, I think it is something that's has made something like this foundational blockchain technology more, maybe not understandable, because it's still a very difficult topic to understand. I just know that's why GPUs are so expensive right now.
Yeah.
But that it's taking this very new foundational technology and applying it to something that is also new and maybe foundational, maybe a bubble. Who knows? We're not going to answer that question on the show.
Yeah.
But I think that's actually really interesting that it can help with managing a deep space network like that.
Managing a deep space network and just coordination among robots that we would have that were just too far away to communicate. I mean, once again, those robots and the artificial agents that would be on those robots, whether they're actually separate robotic mechanisms and separate machines, or actually if they're on the same robot but are just different components of software operating within each other, it allows for a cleaner, clearer audit trail, and actually increased machine-to-machine interaction and transactions. It's a nice, clean platform for doing that. So it's a good way for machines that are on their own to make decisions based on physical phenomena that's happening around them, because they have to come to a quorum about what the state of the world is. And this is one of the better technologies for actually doing that.
So maybe in terms of how this could be applicable to a real life program, the Mars exploration program obviously is a very important thing if we're going to send humans there in 2033, as we often talk about. But even developing that information network there of satellites to relay what's happening on the ground. I mean, because it's 23 minutes to Mars to send a data packet and 23 minutes to come back, not even including the processing time there or on our end.
Yeah.
So maybe it's something that could be used specifically in the human space flight or the robotic space flight arena as something they could test as far as Mars, and then see, because that's going to be the closest. I mean, unless it's something that will also allow you to operate maybe a low Earth orbit network of satellites. But I figure because you're so close to terrestrial ground systems that you wouldn't need something as intense as a blockchain. Is it a program blockchain network?
Well, it's a framework for hosting. Like it fundamentally is a set of algorithms that are running on the different machines that create a distributed network of trust. Right. So think of it this way: if you were to talk about Mars and you were talking about sort of this mission critical, life critical mission, if there were factors of that mission wind speed, temperature control, radiation that could be agreed upon by multiple machines, you would be able. This would give you the ability to have a quorum amongst those machines. So they would be able to tell you that this. You would be able to reach some sort of agreement between those machines that this is the amount of sieverts that would be in this general area of Mars, or this is the current state of this few square miles of wind, and each machine would be able to agree on that and understand that. Not that there's a broken system of trust there, but this leaves a framework for having each of the for each machine to be assured that the values that they're reading about those wind models, or the values that they're reading about that radiation, is true in a network that is not necessarily reliable.
Okay. And so this is just something that could run on its own too. Like that if you had a series of robotic exploration crafts either on orbit or on the surface, or a combination of both, that you could sort of let the system run. So the further out that you go, the less human less human control there is over those split-second decisions that robotic spacecraft might have to make on Europa or further.
The way to think about it is its framework for communication, and it ensures that all people with all entities within its network agree on specific facts. Think of it that way.
Okay.
All things within its network agree on specific facts.
And then you could have an artificial intelligence that then acts on those trusted
Absolutely.
Measures, metrics, whatever it is.
Absolutely. And more importantly, acts on only the things that the network absolutely agrees on. And if there is no quorum, it doesn't include that in its artificial intelligence predictions. It doesn't include that information. It includes only the things that the network itself is sure of, because you've had multiple points of observation that are stating this is the truth, as opposed to one or two pieces of that network stating, oh, this may be true, this may be something that we're detecting, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So I think if we say Bitcoin one more time, our heads are going to explode.
Bitcoin. All right.
All right, we hit 20.
Yes. Moving on to international news. So the Japanese launched $940 million into space, and the first startup that retrieves it gets to keep it. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, the Japanese government announced on Tuesday, March 20th, that they would be ponying up $940 million to fund space startups in a new push to grow the industry. The funds are to be made available through investments and loans over the next 5 years as part of a government-led initiative to double Japan's more than $11 billion space industry. And they're doing this because currently, and Jack, did you know this? There are less than 20 Japanese space startups currently in operation.
Huh.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had no idea that there were so few, but I guess space startups are a relatively new thing, and obviously the U.S. would be one of the one of the key players in that. Yeah, the U.S. and Europe, right? So the government and its critics see this as critical to helping new companies cover costs such as research or applying for patents. Now, Japan has been investing in more space startups in recent years, including Tokyo's iSpace, which aims to develop lunar resources, Astroscale, it's a Singapore-based company, but it's Japan linked. It's a space debris cleaning company, and IQPS, a miniature satellite developer. But even with companies like these, they still number less than 20 and have generally received just billions or hundreds of millions of yen, leaving Japan trailing competitors such as the US. So the way this whole initiative is going to work is nascent startups will be eligible for aid of up to 10 million yen each year to cover costs like research and patent applications. Companies that, not each year, 10 million yen each. Companies that show promise of bringing products or services to market will be introduced to investors and venture capitalists. Those at the development stage will be able to draw from the 100 billion yen pool offered through bodies including the Development Bank of Japan and the Innovation Network Corporation of Japan, which is a public-private investment fund. An agency will be set up to connect startups short on professional talent with seasoned rocket scientists and systems operators from the likes of JAXA, which is the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. This is sounding familiar, right? This is like NASA's small business innovation initiatives.
Yeah.
But here's one kicker that you actually might be interested in, Jack. The government is also considering devising laws and policies to let businesses own plots of land that they develop on the moon.
Illegal. They actually can't do that.
Commercial development and land ownership on the moon are not technically forbidden under the Outer Space Treaty. Not commercial. Not commercial development. For a nation state to do that, that is illegal. But for an individual, that is not illegal. And I will remind you of the story of Francis Williams from back in 1980. Do you know who Francis Williams is?
Why don't you tell the lovely folks?
Okay. Well, Francis Williams describes himself as the lunar ambassador to the United Kingdom. And he is, in fact, the owner of a real estate company known as the Moon Estates. He claims to have sold around 300,000 acres of moonland since he and his wife, Sue, founded the Cornwall-based company 8 years ago. Well, this is actually about 16 years ago. 1 acre plots of lunar turf go for about $40 for this company. As proof of purchase, new property owners receive a silver tin containing a personalized lunar deed and a moon map with a tiny black X marking their track's approximate location. So on to how he actually got this, right? Williams received his license to sell lunar land in the UK from Dennis Hope. In 1980, the Nevada-based entrepreneur claimed ownership of the moon after finding what he calls a loophole in the 1967 UN Outer Space Treaty, which forbids countries from owning the moon, but, according to Hope, does not forbid individuals from owning it. Hope, who estimates he has sold over 500 million acres of moonland, said he immediately filed a declaration of ownership with the UN along with the United States and Russian governments. Hope, who laid claim to the entire land surface of the moon 20 years ago under the Homestead Act of 1862, sent in this information to the UN, but he never actually received a reply. However, he is right in that the treaty, and are you still looking this up?
No, I'm all ready to debunk this. I'm ready to debunk this.
Allegedly, the treaty bars entire countries from ownership, but does not bar individuals from owning plots of land on the moon. While the UN may have ignored Hope's lunar land claims for almost three decades, it's unlikely the organization will be able to ignore what could soon become a question of increasing international importance. Like in this example, who exactly does own the moon? I doubt they're going to let Hope own the entire moon, but this is something that... So the overall answer to that question, Jack, is it's questionable. Hope does not own the entire moon. However, the Outer Space Treaty does not explicitly bar him as an individual from owning plots of the moon. So we need to figure out how, from a policy standpoint, we can actually distribute this, or just bar none state that no individual can actually own plots of land on the moon.
Already, if we use Article 15, any state party to the treaty, which includes 160 signatories, can propose amendments to the treaty that can be then ratified, so we don't even have to have a whole new treaty drawn up. However, I can debunk this in Article 1 and Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. Article 1 says, the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind. Humankind. We'll change it there. Amended. Right there, it already says that no one can own the moon, whether you're a country or whatever. So the Outer Space Treaty is signed by countries. People themselves do not themselves sign international agreements. Countries do, right?
Right.
So that's like saying, oh, well, my government signed the Geneva Convention, but I'm not going to abide by it. You yourself,
I can do whatever war crimes
as
I want.
a citizen of that country, are part of that clause. That you are, as a representative of your country, cannot cannot use the moon or other celestial bodies to benefit yourself or your country.
And that's where Hope fails here, because Hope is actually a citizen of the U.S. He does fall under the treaty, but if he were not to be a citizen of a country, which is virtually impossible, he would not technically fall under that treaty. Is that right or wrong?
So if he were to relinquish citizenship of any country or form his own country, say he does that thing with the people off the coast of Scotland, whatever the name of that country is, or quote unquote country.
I don't know. I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
he could theoretically say that he owns the moon, but the ownership wouldn't be recognized, and that's
the ownership wouldn't be recognized. That's the thing. The ownership is not and that's what seems to be the case here, is that the ownership is, the UN never replied to him, basically, right?
Yeah, because in Article 2 it says outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. I love that it starts each line with that.
What? Oh, the moon and yeah, it does.
Yeah, it has to mention the moon as a part of space
and other celestial bodies. Declaring that they're not as important as the moon. Just the moon and the backup singers, basically.
that would be a great name for a band, Luna and the Celestial Bodies.
And the Celestial Bodies, I love it. But yeah, so you see how complicated this is, though, right? Like this is the issue.
No, it's not complicated. It's one guy who's like, well, I'm not part of a country. I'm only a U.S. citizen. That means I can do whatever I want. Like, he's just there's no legal argument here, Newton. None of this makes sense.
I happen to agree with you, but this is something that's happened, and now Japan is looking to draft laws based that regard development plans on the moon, and that's why this is an actual issue. Is they will probably draft laws based on the American model, but the Outer Space Treaty is something that is going to have to be addressed here, to talk about what they can and cannot, or what these organizations specifically can and cannot do on the moon. Because this is a model where they're giving organizations the capability to conduct their own operations, as opposed to the typical NASA model, whereas, we give them the capability to have their own IP, but that typically feeds right back into NASA.
So that itself, giving them, saying, okay, there you can have this portion of the moon to perform your operations. That's fine if they say that. Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty states parties to the treaty shall bear international responsibility for national activities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, whether such activities are carried on by government agencies or by non-governmental entities. So basically what that means is that a country itself can say, okay, we're going to allow this X company to go to the moon from our spaceport. And they fly up and they land on the moon, and the country itself says, oh, you can kind of operate in like this little area. And it's okay, fine, whatever. Internationally, legally speaking, the country itself can't reprimand the company for going outside of the bounds. It's maybe more of a social contract than a legal one. But that if that company then takes a moon rock and brings it back, that moon rock is not the property of that company, of that country. It's the property of all mankind. Yeah, it's not that they're going to then take the moon rock and slice it up 7.5 billion ways and distribute it to everyone, but probably go into a museum somewhere. But that would be where the legal repercussions would take place if they bring anything back. But from what it sounds like, this is more a go land on the moon, do some exploration. There's probably going to be some conversation about planetary protection within JAXA. I can't think of that. I don't think they have a planetary protection office. So it might be something that the UN gets involved with and offers some services. Maybe there's a partnership with NASA.
Right. Once again, the laws that they're drafting up now are really, this is really them entering into this domain before they had to sort of operate based on within the rules or boundaries of the other countries that they were aiding. But now this is Japan actually trying to attempt to lead on their own. And with that comes the laws that you have to draft up that actually apply to the Outer Space Treaty and so on and so forth. So
Exactly. So maybe a last note on this is just to say that the way that this gets out of hand is if there is a de facto process for countries to section off parts of the moon and say, well, this is the American portion, and they're not laying claim to that portion of the moon or claiming sovereignty of it, but that there is, but they say, oh, well, this is where the Americans will be, and this is where the Russians will be, and this is where the Japanese will be. And it's just kind of understood that that happens. And then that becomes part of the just the way that we do things, the culture of lunar exploration. And then it basically gets codified in these roles and cultural norms within the space community. I think what this does bring up is that there needs to be a more clear set of rules, and maybe even like a congregation of the state part or the parties who have signed on to the Outer Space Treaty to convene and say, okay, this is what needs to be changed. Here's the amendments that we're proposing that solve X, Y, and Z problems. I don't think it has to be so big as we get another treaty or that there has to be some major international conflict here. I think it's working within the confines of the UN to determine an interpretation of the Outer Space Treaty that benefits commercial exploration of the lunar surface and other celestial bodies, but doesn't infringe on those states' rights that are enumerated within the Outer Space Treaty to, say, allow non-governmental entities to land on the moon and other celestial objects.
All right. So for more on the Outer Space Treaty, Jack, where can they find a copy of the Outer Space Treaty?
Well, I will. I'll link it. Wikipedia.
Wiki has a good copy.
Their wiki source. Yeah. I mean, and it's got all the things that you need for it, all the articles. So that'll be linked in the show notes for your own interpretation of OST.
Yes, for you to interpret it however you would like. Just
because
like,
obviously that's what we do in space. No one really knows. Again, it's going back to this theme of nothing matters until it really matters. So
that's true. So I wonder what Dennis Hope is doing now. By the way, we'll have to get an update on that.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah. All right. So last story before we do our Coming Soon in Space is Lace and Tech. So we reported on a story back in December 2017 about Google AI throwing Kepler data into a deep convolutional neural network in order to identify a list of candidate exoplanets within that data stream. They trained a neural network on about 700 stars worth of data, putting in ground truth about what was a planet and what wasn't, as well as what was other physical phenomena, and they were successfully able to discover 2 new planets, exoplanets. Jack, you remember this from like 3 months ago. Well, Google is now releasing the code for this capability to the public. In an announcement back on March 8th, we obviously missed this story, Google stated, today we're excited to release our code for processing the Kepler data, training our neural network model, and making predictions about new candidate signals. We hope this release will prove a useful starting point for developing similar models for other NASA missions, like K2, which is Kepler's second mission, and the upcoming Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite mission. As well as announcing the release of our code, we'd also like to take this opportunity to dig a bit deeper into how our model works. And there's a link in the show notes with a full, beautiful explanation, and you can almost use this as a primer to the use of neural networks for predicting physical phenomena. It's a great explanation. This is on it's effectively Google's research blog, and we'll leave a note in the show notes for that. But for those in the know, what they've actually released is a TensorFlow model, which is a toolkit for artificial intelligence that still requires some hefty training to increase both precision and sensitivity. But my guess is that Google is releasing this to the public and probably using its expertise to see how other AI approaches would work. For this specific mission case, either they're completely leaving the mission alone and just handing it off to the public, or they're using it in order to investigate other approaches, expert systems, other forms of supervised or unsupervised learning. Or they could be building on top of other software using other AI techniques such as stacking or meta learning to create a more accurate predictor. Because if you remember, I believe this came up with a list of, I want to say, hundreds or even thousands of potential candidates. It was filled with false positives. But it's great to see them releasing this to the public. This code should help out a lot of folks who are doing research in this space. So I'm sure you guys will see more news about research that comes out that has leveraged this model, or at least used this model as a benchmark to compare to other research models. That's typically what will happen in this space. Is if I were to come out with a new AI algorithm or a new application of AI algorithm for predicting exoplanets, I would want to measure the use of my algorithm on the same data against this model and other benchmark models in order to demonstrate why my algorithm is effectively better, or at least to characterize it. So, any thoughts on that, Jack? Google, are you going to play around with some neural networks from Google? Poke around with NASA data?
Yeah, I have time for that.
All right. And then finally, coming soon to space. I know we've got a few incoming soon to space. Jack, you want to talk a little bit about JWST and their updated schedule?
Yeah. So Thomas Zurbuchen talked at a NASA Advisory Council Science Committee hearing that there is an independent review of the James Webb Space Telescope coming out in the next week. That this review is going to indicate what the schedule is currently going to be looking like for the launch of JWST. And what's going to be more important, whether they think there's going to be a cost overrun. Because as we talked about a couple weeks ago, that the JWST legally only has an $8 billion cap.
Totally only going to stay under that cap. No way we go over it.
$8,001 cannot be spent. $8 billion, that's fine.
If it's $8,000,001, throw it out. Just throw it out. Throw it in the trash. That's it.
And so we've talked about this a lot recently, that JWST has been seeing some delays in its launch. It was supposed to launch in early next year. And then originally it was 2018.
Yeah.
And then they pushed it off, and then they pushed it off.
Originally, it was before even 2018. It was like 2017, I thought. And then it got pushed to 2018, and then it got pushed to 2019.
In an alternate universe, JWST has already launched.
Yeah, in an alternate universe, we've already found life using JWST.
Well, yeah, so currently the window... so I'm reading it here. It says in 2017, they announced that the scheduled launch, which was October 2018, would slip to March to June 2019, and has since been pushed back even more to later 2019. So we'll see what this independent review comes up with. It'll give us a better sense of where it is as a program and how much money is left to be spent on it. And again, this does not bode well for WFIRST unless this report comes out and says, well, we can either move up the launch date, or the launch date's going to stay where it is currently, which is still, mid to late 2019.
What would be frightening?
What?
Oh.
What would be frightening, Newton? There's a lot frightening me.
All notion of my entire notion and previous understanding of the way that logic works would tell me that a reasonable Congress and president would not can this project. A reasonable Congress and president would not can this project.
If the administration said, hey, JWST, you're over your $8 billion cap, we're going to just scrap the project, this would be like the one instance in which you would have like the planetary scientists and the astrophysicists like marching through the streets of Washington.
Once again, my basic, for lack of a better term, common sense tells me there's no way Congress and the president would scrap this project.
Just by the fact that you had that thought means that there's a risk. So
Jesus
stop
Christ.
your thinking, Newton. Stop your thinking.
These are the Trump years. Stop your thinking.
We're saying so many things that would make great titles of the show, and
I know.
we haven't picked
Bitcoin.
one yet. It'll probably just
Bitcoin.
be Bitcoin.
These are the
Bitcoin,
Trump
Bitcoin.
years. Stop your thinking.
All right, so yeah, let's move on. We're almost at an hour here. So the next thing in Coming Soon to Space, there's going to be a markup that was scheduled for today, Wednesday, and will actually be taking place today, Thursday. I'm giving myself that deadline to do the editing tonight, Thursday at 10 a.m. So if you are listening to this on your commute into DC or wherever you're going at 10 a.m., in the Rayburn House office building, room 2318, there's going to be a hearing on 3 pieces of legislation, one of which has already been numbered. The other 2 are kind of out in the ether. So the one that actually has a number is HR 5086, which is the Innovators to Entrepreneurs Act of 2018 and deals with, under the National Science Foundation, the Innovation Corps program, where it helps innovators or helps scientists become entrepreneurs and business owners and provides courses and best practice trainings.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
A pretty non-controversial program. It was started in 2011 administratively by the foundation to create this program, and then was authorized by the American Innovation Competitiveness Act in 2011. That it creates this office within the National Science Foundation to help scientists, postdoctoral fellows, graduate students take their research and maybe turn it into something that has economic or commercial value. And basically what this piece of legislation does is says, this is a great thing that the NSF does. Let's keep doing it, and let's create these new application methods. Yeah, I don't see this as being a controversial piece of legislation. It has the word innovation in the title, so it's probably going to pass. The other 2 things that are being marked up. So this is a markup hearing. So they're going to go through with a red pen and cross out things they don't like and add things that they do like and all that stuff. So, I mean, on some of these, there's probably nothing going to change. They're just going to say, okay, it's great. Let's move it on to a vote. Or moving on to whatever next part of the process that they want to send it through. The next one, HR blank, the American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry Act. Going back to this, nothing matters until it actually does. This one actually really doesn't matter. It's a sense of Congress, which it's a piece of legislation, but it itself is not a law. Even if it passes both houses of Congress with the exact same language, the president doesn't sign a sense of Congress, because it's the sense of Congress, the feeling of a majority of the Congress that X is the case.
The president doesn't sign feelings. Another candidate show title.
The president doesn't sign feelings. I really like that. So basically what this does is it designates the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville as the premier place of leadership for U.S. rocketry in the U.S. And it just encourages Marshall to work more with commercial entities to develop breakthroughs in rocketry. Just really generic sounding language. It really doesn't seem like it's going to mean much. It is, though. I really like that the acronym for it is the All-Star Act.
The All-Star Act? Really?
Yeah. American Leadership in Space Technology and Advanced Rocketry.
I've got to give that to them. Yeah, that's pretty dope. I like that. Yeah.
I mean, they could use that for something else, but whatever. Yeah. And finally, there's the third bill that they're marking up is the Commercial Space Support Vehicle Act, which really all it does is it pushes the Department of Transportation to look more closely at their regulatory structure for what they call space support vehicles. And specifically those that are built by commercial entities and not used by the government. And that includes a space support vehicle, just for your understanding, is a launch vehicle, a reentry vehicle, or a component of a launch or reentry vehicle. So,
okay,
there we go. So those are the things coming soon to space in Washington. What else we got, Newton?
Well, And one last thing coming soon to space in the UK. Once again, remembering Stephen Hawking, British physicist Stephen Hawking is to take his place among some of the greatest scientists in history when his ashes are interred inside Westminster Abbey, close to the graves of Sir Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. For reference, Sir Isaac Newton was buried in the Abbey in 1727, and Charles Darwin was buried beside Newton in 1882. Professor Hawking, who died on March 14th at age 76 at his home in Cambridge, will be buried alongside the two on the 31st of March after a private funeral service. It takes place at Great St. Mary's, the University Church. I was actually at Great St. Mary's as well as Gonville and Keys, which is pretty close to Great St. Mary's, last year. And I definitely will be visiting both of those, all three of those churches again whenever I go back to England, potentially over the next year or two. Professor Hawking was actually a fellow for more than 50 years at Gonville and Keys. So he definitely shares a special relationship with both of those institutions, Gonville and Keys College. Hawking, once again, as we said on the show last week, was one of the greatest inspirations for a generation or two generations of scientists. He pulled me into the sciences with some of his works like A Brief History of Time or The Grand Design, and he will certainly be missed. That's all we've got for coming soon to space.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have one more thing before we sign off. So there is a talk happening at where there's an event happening at the National Academies of Sciences next Wednesday, March 28th at 7 p.m. It's a talk by Dr. David Reitze. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he worked with the LIGO program to study gravitational waves. So cool. It's talking about gravitational waves, the astronomical revolution. It's a public lecture. There will be an RSVP link in the show notes, as well as a link to the live stream so that you can sign up now and get a notification when it's about to start.
Very cool.
Should be a great talk. Unfortunately, I will not be able to make it, but I will watch the video when I'm able to. Awesome. But yeah, that stuff's in the show notes. We're over an hour long. This is going to be a great episode. Bitcoin. And Donald Trump is president. And stop thinking.
The president doesn't sign congressional feelings or something like that.
Yes, the president does not sign congressional feelings. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah. And again, if we haven't done this in a while, but if there's anything you want us to cover, shoot us a note on Facebook, Twitter, our personal emails. If you can send a carrier pigeon, smoke signals, whatever it is, so long as we can decipher it, we will answer your questions on next week's episode.
Yep.
All right. Well, as always, I'm your host, Jack.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.